Everyone knows her pacemaker stopped working at 2:28 in the morning. That is the exact time the entire country has been talking about since February. But there is another timestamp one that almost no one has ever mentioned. 16 minutes earlier, at 2:12 in the morning, a motion sensor was triggered inside Nancy Guthrie's home. Not on the porch, not outside, but inside. Whoever took her did not just slip in at 1:47 when the doorbell camera was cut off. They were already inside, moving silently through the darkness of her home, waiting in position 16 minutes before Nancy Guthrie vanished. Just a quick note before we begin every single source of what you will hear. The verified facts, the details from single reports, and the lingering questions that still remain open for those who study this case is detailed and linked in the description below. We want you to verify our work and read it yourself because those who loved Nancy Guthrie deserve the truth handled with absolute respect. Now let us walk through those 16 minutes together because once you understand their true meaning, you will never look at this case the same way again. Let me tell you what 16 minutes inside a stranger's house actually feels like. If you have ever been a police officer, a soldier, or had to move through the dark of an unfamiliar building, you know the truth. Time stands still and every tiny sound becomes deafening. Every single step is a risk. You do not know where the furniture is or which floorboard will creak. You have no idea if the next door leads to a closet, a bedroom, or just a solid wall. A professional burglar, someone who robs houses for a living, operates in a 5-minute window, in steel and out. Spending 10 minutes inside is amateur. Spending 20 minutes is complete madness because every extra second on someone else's property increases the odds of getting caught. So, what does it mean that someone spent 16 minutes walking through Nancy Guthrie's house before her pacemaker went offline? It tells us they were not lost. It reveals they did not stumble over a single object in the pitch black. They did not knock over a lamp, drag any chairs, or make a sound loud enough to wake a woman sleeping 30 feet away. 16 minutes of silent, confident movement in a dark house is not the work of a stranger, but of someone who had walked those halls before. Someone who knew exactly where the bedroom was. Someone who knew which way to turn in the dark because they had done it 100 times with the lights on and Nancy standing right beside them. Think about that. 16 minutes in the dark without making a single sound. That is not an intrusion. It is the welcome of someone who should never have walked through that door. And this brings up the first major question that this case has never been able to escape. If they moved through that house like they owned it, how many times had they been inside before? Because recordings prove this was not their only visit. Investigators believe the suspects scouted the property before February 1st. One trip was purely for reconnaissance. A quiet walkthrough to study the camera, test the access and calculate their timing. The other trip was the execution. Someone was on Nancy's porch days or weeks before closely analyzing that doorbell camera, and then returned on the night of February 1st to execute a plan already fully mapped out in their mind. That is the massive difference between a crime of opportunity and a crime driven by obsession. An opportunist sees an open window and acts. This person studied, rehearsed, and returned. They committed this crime in their head long before ever setting foot in that house. And when they stepped onto that porch for the final time, there was nothing left to figure out. They knew exactly where they were going and what they were about to do. To answer that, you have to look at the backpack. When the FBI released the doorbell footage, showing that masked silhouette slowly making its way to the entrance at 1:47 in the morning, the entire country focused on the mask, the gloves, and the slow, calculated stride of the suspect, as if they had already been there and memorized every corner. Yet almost no one paid attention to the backpack. And that backpack might be the most crucial detail in the entire video. Think about what it was really for. If this were just a simple botched burglary, you would expect tools, rope, a crowbar, implements grabbed on the fly. But police do not believe that is what was inside. The evidence points to something far more terrifying. That backpack was meant for carrying away the cameras. Nancy's security equipment installed across her property, which this person already knew the exact location of. Here is why that is so crucial. You don't take down cameras you don't even know are there. You don't walk into a pitch black house at 2 in the morning to disable a security system you've never even seen. It's impossible to know which cameras record to a cloud subscription and which only send motion alerts without saving a single second of footage. Unless you've already tested it, unless you've been inside standing right there in that very entryway, in that hallway in that backyard during a normal visit at a perfectly reasonable hour, while someone who trusted you showed you around, those cameras weren't smashed or left on the floor. They were taken, stuffed inside a backpack, so whatever happened within those four walls would never, ever come to light. Think about how much someone had to know to pull this off with such clinical precision. Nancy had a network of cameras protecting the home where she had lived for 52 years. A doorbell camera out front, another out back, cameras near the guest house, and a very high likelihood of cameras inside the house. A woman in her 80s living alone relied on those digitalized to feel safe. Disabling that system in the dark in minutes takes a flawless mental map. You had to know the exact location of every single camera beforehand and which ones actually recorded, or which just sent alerts. That's not information you can get from the sidewalk. You get that kind of intel in the living room sipping coffee while a trusting old woman proudly shows you where everything is. And that paints a very clear picture of who we are dealing with. This was no unlucky burglar. Not some stranger picking a house at random. It was someone who had already been inside. Someone she trusted, someone who weaponized that warmth and turned it against her, and used it to step right through Nancy Guthrie's front door. We know they'd been there before. The next question is simpler and yet far more disturbing. How did they get inside? Looking at the layout of Nancy's property, one detail stands out immediately. The house had an attached garage with direct access inside. The very entrance where her son-in-law walked her in at 9:50 p.m. on January 31st, marking the last confirmed moment Nancy was alive in her home. That garage was the logical entryway, the obvious escape route. It is enclosed completely invisible from the street. You could put someone in a car inside that garage with zero visibility from the sidewalk. No neighbor would notice a thing from their window. No passing driver at 2:30 in the morning would see anything suspicious to report. If you need to slip someone out of a residential neighborhood unnoticed, the garage is always your best bet. But they did not use the garage. They chose the front door facing the street, where investigators later found Nancy Guthrie's blood on the porch. And that blood tells its own story. Renowned forensic pathologist Dr. Michael Baden, who has worked on high-profile American cases, analyzed the pattern of those blood droplets. He noted they were donut-shaped, a classic pattern of blood dropping from the nose or mouth, mixing with air during movement. Simply put, Nancy was actively bleeding while being dragged away by force. Bleeding on her own porch, dragged toward a street she had walked in peace for 5 decades. This was no peaceful exit. It was a violent struggle written in the only clue the abductor could not pack away. So why the front door? Why would someone meticulous enough to strip every camera? Someone who timed this perfectly choose that exit, the one leading straight to the street. Those close to the property believe they have the answer. That garage was wired to a smart system. A system that logs every single time the garage door opens or closes. A system that, the moment the FBI asked, would hand over a detailed digital trail, a timestamp showing the door opened at 2:30 in the morning, a permanent log stored on a cloud server impossible to erase. So, they chose the front door, a manual analog escape route that left absolutely no digital footprint. You only avoid an automated system like that if you know it is there. And you only know it exists if you've been inside that house to see it work, or if the woman who lived there told you about it. This was no panic-fueled mistake. There was zero improvisation here. This was someone staying 3 steps ahead on a night when the entire neighborhood slept soundly. Someone who understood the forensic impact of every choice they made, making every move to protect themselves. And if all of this was planned weeks in advance, then there is one more detail we must analyze deeply. Because 6 weeks before any of this occurred, something else shifted in Nancy Guthrie's world. Something that removed the only barrier between a sleeping woman and whoever walked through her door. Last December, Nancy Guthrie's dog died. The family was told it was natural causes. The dog was old and had cancer, a sad and expected loss. The kind of thing that just happens to older animals. But let's step back and consider what that dog represented far beyond the grief of losing him. That dog was a security system, the oldest and most reliable kind there is. It didn't matter how old the dog was its breed, or if it only would have barked. A dog senses an intruder in a quiet sleeping house in ways no security camera or pacemaker ever could. Picture it 2:12 a.m. A shadow slips down the hallway toward an elderly woman's bedroom. The dog doesn't stay quiet. It wakes up, it barks. It makes the kind of noise that wakes up neighbors and has people reaching for their phones. The kind of noise that turns a meticulous plan into absolute chaos in seconds. But there was no dog at 2:12 a.m. on February 1st. There was only Nancy alone and asleep in the dark alongside whoever was already inside. People following this case online have asked a hard question about the timeline. The dog died in December. The abduction happened on February the 1st, 6 weeks later. And they have pointed out an uncomfortable detail, which is that nobody performs an autopsy on an old dog with a diagnosed illness. No one orders toxicology reports for a sick pet whose death everyone was already expecting. Now, no one has proven anything bad happened to that dog. He could have died just like everyone thought, but this is the pattern people can't help but notice. The alarm went silent in December, and 6 weeks later the cameras cut out and Nancy vanished. I'm not here to tell you what to think about all this. I'll only say that this timing doesn't sit right with a lot of people who have looked at this case objectively. What we do know, what is absolutely beyond doubt, is this. Nancy Guthrie knew something was wrong, and she wasn't going to stay quiet about it. This is the part of the story that breaks my heart every time I think about it. Nancy Guthrie had an appointment. On the morning of February 3rd at 10, she was scheduled to meet with her lawyer. She never made it to that meeting. Think about who Nancy was. 84 years old, sharp, independent, a woman who managed her own finances for decades and read her financial statements with the care of someone who missed nothing. She wasn't confused or losing her faculties. She was a woman who noticed when the numbers didn't add up, and she had the courage to act. Those close to the case believe Nancy saw something in her own affairs that alarmed her, prompting her to pick up the phone and call for help. She booked that meeting to regain control, to set the record straight, and to ensure what she found wouldn't stay hidden. She had 2 days, just 2 days between that firm decision to act and the morning she was supposed to walk into her lawyer's office. She never got those 2 days. And there is one more element to this that makes it almost unbearable. Those following this case closely point to a voicemail Nancy is believed to have left just hours before her abduction. A message where she sounded different, worried, like a woman who knew things had changed and wanted to make sure she was heard. We are not going to put words in Nancy's mouth that we cannot fully back up. But the picture that emerges is of a woman actively trying to protect herself in her final 3 hours, making calls, scheduling that meeting, refusing to allow whatever she had discovered to remain buried. At some point during those 48 hours, someone decided that Nancy's knowledge and her drive to act were far too dangerous. And they stopped her from making that 10 a.m. appointment on February 3rd. This 84-year-old woman had the courage to say, "I know something is wrong and I won't stay quiet." And maybe that is exactly what cost her everything. That isn't just some cold case detail. We are talking about a human being, a mother, a grandmother, a woman who saw a threat and faced it head on, just as she always had in her 52 years in that home. And the cruelest part of all is that the people who took her knew her well enough to know she would act. Which brings us to the ransom note, because what was written there proves someone was inside that house, inside that room, while Nancy was still there. There were 2 ransom notes in this case. And that first note settles the debate about it being an inside job containing details only someone inside that very room could possibly know. It revealed where Nancy's Apple Watch was left. Think about that. Nobody knows where an 84-year-old woman puts her watch before sleeping unless they have been inside her bedroom. It described her exact clothes with unsettling precision. There is no way to know what someone is wearing at 2 in the morning unless you saw them with your own eyes. Whoever wrote that first note had first-hand knowledge of what happened in Nancy Guthrie's home that night. They were either there or someone who was told them directly. And here is the detail about that note that should chill you to the bone. Savannah Guthrie read it publicly on the night of February 2nd, just 1 day after her mother vanished. This was not after weeks of grueling negotiations. Not even after a deadline had run out, it was the very next night. This means the note was not written as events unfolded. It was prepared in advance, drafted before February 1st. Whoever drafted it already knew they were taking Nancy Guthrie long before making their first move. That is not desperation. And it is not a crime that spun out of control. It is premeditation written in cold ink by someone who knew exactly what they were going to do. Then we find the second note. And this second note is bizarre in a way that has raised serious doubts because it is completely different. It reads as remorseful, emotional, and wildly out of place, in a way a calculated ransom demand never would be. It does not look like the words of a kidnapper pulling a heist just for quick cash. It sounds like someone gripped by guilt, or perhaps a completely different person than the one who wrote the first note. Two notes, two conflicting tones, two entirely different emotional states. And that has led investigators to a single chilling possibility: there was more than one mind behind this crime. What initially looked like a standard kidnapping for ransom hid something far darker beneath the surface. Something that definitely does not fit the profile of someone who was simply chasing a payout. While this was unfolding inside the active investigation, something else was happening right outside Nancy's house. Something almost nobody reported. Let me tell you what has been going on in that Catalina Foothills neighborhood since February. There is a dark, grey, short-bed crew cab truck with heavily tinted windows, the kind that looks suspicious on purpose. It has tires with white lettering facing out, an uncommon look specific enough to easily stick in your mind. Locals have spotted this truck lurking near Nancy's house on multiple occasions, cruising slowly the way a vehicle moves when it is not heading anywhere but rather keeping watch. Those who have spent months monitoring the neighborhood and logging suspicious vehicles have reported this truck repeatedly. This is crucial because violent crime profilers know that organized criminals who meticulously plan and rehearse every step, disarming security cameras and dodging smart systems, can rarely stay away. They feel a deep urge to return to the scene. They drive by. They watch from afar, not out of carelessness, but driven by a dark obsession to stay connected to the crime. Someone is still driving past that house. Someone still needs to watch it. Then there is the getaway route. Along a stretch of road, identified as a potential getaway path, investigators discovered a license plate reader. Not some standard traffic camera, a license plate scanner. A device recording plates, car models, and timestamps for every vehicle. Positioned at a key choke point, it recorded every vehicle on that road around February 1st. Yet nobody knows who installed it. Perhaps the FBI was monitoring a corridor they had already identified, or Border Patrol keeping watch on a direct route to Mexico. But here is the critical part: if the vehicle carrying Nancy Guthrie drove past, it was recorded. Make, model, license plate, and time, all stored in a database waiting to be linked to a suspect. And there is one more detail. Weeks after she vanished, a helicopter was spotted flying a grid pattern over the Pima County landfill. Not news reporters nor routine mapping. A slow, repetitive pattern flying back and forth. Morgan Wright, an intelligence and cybersecurity expert who has worked on this case, has analyzed the advanced tracking technology being deployed in the search. And there is a theory with a painful logic. A pacemaker, even disconnected from the body it once kept alive, still emits a unique electromagnetic signature. Specialized search teams have technology to detect that signal, even buried deep underground. If investigators suspected Nancy's remains were in that landfill, a quiet search by helicopter, using specialized detection gear, is exactly what we would see. Did they find anything? No one says a word. In an active investigation, silence never means empty space. And there is another detail unfolding in that neighborhood that almost no one is mentioning. Someone has been dumping debris, cut cacti and rocks on the public road right in front of Nancy's house. In the dead of night, right on the stretch that searchers and neighbors use as their base to find her. No landscaping reasons, no practical purpose at all. Just an obstacle meant to hinder those watching the property. Think carefully about who would do that. Not a stranger, but a local annoyed by the cameras, by the searches, and this endless attention. Someone who wants to stop it all, and instead of confronting people or calling the police, prefers to cause trouble in the dark without being seen. People with nothing to hide never act like this. And there is a group of potential witnesses investigators might have completely overlooked. The canal's drainage ditches and desert trails near Nancy's home are not empty at night. People live out there. Folks who move silently and know the rhythms of that land. They notice strange cars immediately because their own safety depends on it. People awake at 2 in the morning, keeping watch in the dark. Someone camping near Camino Real at 2:30 Tote. In the morning might recall a car driving with its lights off, or remember a strange noise. Maybe they hold that single clue that changes this case, something no one has ever asked them. No badges, no notebooks. Just two people talking face to face, asking a simple question. What did you see? That conversation has not happened the way it should, and it could be the key to cracking this whole mystery. This proves to me that the case is still very much alive. Despite online chatter, the FBI moved Nancy Guthrie's case from the Tucson office to the main headquarters in Phoenix. No agency does that for convenience. They do it when they need more agents' resources and specialized tools that a small office cannot handle. Moving the case to Phoenix does not mean the investigation is winding down. On the contrary, they are ramping it up and take a close look at everything they hold. A security video at 1:47. 2 distinct DNA profiles, 2 men, one found inside and another on a glove 2 miles away. Neither of them registered in the database. Phone records for every active cell phone in the area that night. A motion alert inside the home at 2:12. The pacemaker shutting down at 2:28. Nancy's blood on the porch. Personal details in a ransom note written beforehand and that 10 o'clock appointment with her lawyer she never made. This is not a cold case. It is a crime with more hard evidence than any typical kidnapping, and the perpetrator simply can never escape the DNA. Forensic genetic genealogy does not require a confession or any cooperation from them. It worked on the Golden State Killer, and on Brian Kohberger using samples that were not in any system. All it takes is a distant relative, a second cousin, who took an ancestry DNA test for the family tree to start coming together branch by branch right to their name. 2 DNA profiles mean 2 family trees and double the chances for that relative to show up. And when the algorithm finds the name, which it will, everything will collapse in a matter of hours. But we must understand the ticking clock haunting the killer. Genetic genealogy is not fast. It can take 9 months a year or longer to build those trees. But science is relentless and never sleeps. It does not lose interest when the cameras leave. Every day in some lab, those branches get closer to crossing. The Golden State Killer thought he had escaped justice for 40 years. Brian Kohberger thought cleaning up the crime scene would save him. Today, both are behind bars. Science does not care how careful you were that night. It is just looking for that cousin you have never met. So, whoever spent those 60 minutes inside Nancy Guthrie's house is not safe. The clock is ticking for them. And that countdown is not going to stop. I need to be direct because this is the hardest truth of this entire case. Someone already knows. Someone very close to the suspect. Someone within their own family circle. Someone living with them. Someone who has watched them for years and finally noticed something was off. Maybe it was the security footage, the walk, the posture, or the outline of that backpack on their shoulders. Details they have recognized forever, or perhaps a passing comment that felt wrong, one they could never forget. Seasoned investigators know that a mother always recognizes her own child even behind a mask. And the person closest to the suspect right now is quietly weighing their options. Do they stay silent to protect a loved one, hoping it blows over, or accept that this will not go away? They know the DNA is being processed, family trees are being mapped, and the FBI has a shortlist of everyone with access to Nancy and her home in the months leading up to her disappearance. They know the first person in that circle to pick up the phone is the only one with a shot at a different future. The first caller gets the deal. The second just watches the hammer fall. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old. She lived in that home since 1973. It was where she raised her children, where she buried her husband, kept her faith-baked cookies for her grandkids, and gazed at the Catalina Mountains. Through her windows, watching 52 years of Arizona sunrises. She was sharp, independent, and on that Friday, brave enough to realize something was wrong and refused to stay silent. She deserved to walk into her attorney's office that Monday morning. She deserved to take back control of her life. She deserved to live out her remaining years in the home she cherished, surrounded by family, but someone decided her bravery was an unacceptable threat. Yet that bravery did not die with her silence. It lives on in the volunteers searching dry desert creeks in the blistering heat. It lives in retired detectives driving to Tucson on their own dime, refusing to let her become just another cold case file. And in everyone listening right now who refuses to look away. If you have information on Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, please contact the FBI at 1-800-225-5324. Submit anonymous tips at tips.fbi.gov. That $1 million reward is still on the table. And the first person to make that call is the only one who gets to walk away with a future. Every source used for this video can be found in the description. Read them, do your own research, and decide for yourselves. If this helped you understand the case, please leave a like, subscribe, and hit notifications. We will not stop until Nancy is brought home. And tell me in the comments, after everything you just heard about those crucial 16 minutes, do you think it was a stranger or someone hiding in plain sight? I read every single comment. And I will see you in the next video. Nancy, your searchers are still out there. Every week they are combing the creeks and hills near your home, searching where nobody else has looked, pushing, step by step, to find you. We have not stopped searching, and we never will.